I woke up in a sterile hospital bed with the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoing in my ears. The last thing I remembered was lifting a glass of Cabernet at my husband family dinner. Through the crack in the door, I heard my mother-in-law whisper, "Are you sure she drank it all?" My sister-in-law let out a quiet laugh. "Relax. By tomorrow morning, every dime will be ours." My blood ran cold, but my mind had never been sharper. I reached for my phone under the blanket and texted my attorney. "Execute the plan. Now." I am Natalie, 34 years old, and a forensic data analyst who catches financial criminals for a living. My in-laws had no idea they just became my primary targets. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who severely underestimated your intelligence. The heavy wooden door to my hospital room creaked open, forcing me to quickly shut my eyes and feign unconsciousness. Heavy footsteps approached my bed. I recognized the scent of expensive cologne instantly. It was Spencer, my husband of 7 years, a 35-year-old regional sales director who cared more about his golf handicap than his marriage. He placed a warm hand on my shoulder, giving it a gentle practice squeeze. "Natalie, honey, are you awake?" His voice dripped with manufactured concern. I let out a soft groan, fluttering my eyelids open to put on the performance of a lifetime. I forced my breathing to remain shallow, acting exactly like the helpless, incapacitated woman they needed me to be. Spencer leaned over me, his perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled to complete his worried husband routine. "What happened?" I murmured, letting my words slur together. "My head is spinning." "You collapsed at dinner last night," Spencer said, stroking my hair. "The doctor said it was severe food poisoning. You scared us all to death. You have been completely out of it for hours." Food poisoning. The lie was so smooth it almost made me laugh. I knew exactly what had happened. I remembered the bitter aftertaste of the wine his sister Melanie had so insistently poured for me. I remembered the sudden wave of dizziness, the room tilting, and the darkness swallowing me whole before the dessert was even served. They had drugged me. Spencer reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a wooden clipboard with a stack of papers attached. He produced a small ink pad from his pocket, setting it on the tray table next to my bed. "I hate to bother you with this right now," he continued, his tone shifting to one of urgent practicality. "But the hospital administration is giving me a massive headache. They are saying your premium health insurance policy lapsed last month. They are refusing to run the necessary diagnostic tests until we can provide a significant deposit." I stared at him, keeping my expression blank and confused. My insurance had not lapsed. I paid the premiums manually on the first of every month directly from my personal checking account. As a forensic data analyst, I tracked every single penny that entered and exited my life with ruthless precision. The lie was glaringly obvious, but calling him out now would ruin months of careful planning. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I need to access our emergency savings account to pay the deposit," Spencer explained smoothly. "But the bank requires dual authorization for wire transfers over a certain amount. Since you cannot hold a pen right now, the bank manager said a thumbprint authorization on this medical release form will suffice. It just gives me temporary access to handle these hospital bills while you recover." He held the clipboard up to my face. My vision was no longer blurry, and my trained eyes immediately caught the bold legal phrasing at the top of the document. It was not a medical release form. It was a general power of attorney. A sweeping, unconditional document that would give him absolute legal control over every bank account, investment portfolio, and real estate asset in my name. He was trying to legally rob me blind while I was trapped in a hospital bed. I let out a weak cough, letting my head loll back against the pillows. "I cannot really read it, Spencer. My eyes are too blurry." "Do not worry about reading it, babe. I have got everything handled. Just press your thumb here and I will take care of the rest." He uncapped the ink pad and gently took my right hand. I allowed my arm to go entirely limp, offering no resistance, as he pressed my thumb into the dark blue ink and then firmly onto the signature line of the power of attorney document. The sheer relief that washed over his face was intoxicating to witness. He practically ripped the paper from the clipboard, blowing on the ink to dry it faster. "About time your boring spreadsheet job paid off, Natalie." The sharp, condescending voice belonged to Barbara, my 62-year-old mother-in-law. She strutted into the hospital room, her heels clicking loudly against the linoleum floor. She was dressed in a tailored Chanel suit, clutching a designer handbag that cost more than most people made in a month. She wrinkled her nose at the sterile hospital environment, aggressively wiping her handbag with a tissue where it had briefly brushed against the foot of my bed. Barbara snatched the clipboard from Spencer's hands, inspecting my thumbprint with a triumphant smirk. "Spencer has housed you for 7 years," she sneered, looking down at me with absolute disdain. "Signing over your savings is the least you can do to repay his incredible generosity. You should be grateful a man of his stature even looked twice at a working-class girl like you." I kept my face perfectly still, fighting the urge to rip the document from her manicured hands. Her delusion was legendary in our social circle. Barbara loved to play the wealthy matriarch of the local country club, hosting extravagant luncheons and boasting about her son's lucrative career. But her reality was a carefully constructed house of cards. She was drowning in secret debt, taking out multiple mortgages to fund a lifestyle she could no longer afford. And as for Spencer housing me, that was the biggest joke of all. I was the primary breadwinner in our marriage. My income from corporate fraud consulting dwarfed his regional sales salary by a massive margin. I paid the mortgage on our 4-bedroom suburban home. I funded our vacations. I paid the utility bills. Spencer spent his entire paycheck on luxury car leases, expensive golf club memberships, and God knows what else. Yet Barbara had spent the last 7 years convincing herself and everyone around us that her son was a magnanimous provider, rescuing me from poverty. "Make sure you file this immediately, Spencer," Barbara commanded, tapping the document with her long fingernails. "We do not have time to waste. Once the funds clear, we can finally stop pretending this arrangement works." Spencer nodded, slipping the forged power of attorney back into his briefcase. "Get some rest, Natalie. The nurses will be in to check on you soon. I will handle the bills and come back tonight." They did not even bother asking how I felt or if I needed water. They just turned their backs and walked out of the room, their voices fading down the corridor as they excitedly discussed their impending payout. The heavy door clicked shut, plunging the room back into silence. Instantly, my fragile demeanor vanished. I sat up straight, tossing the thin hospital blanket aside. I grabbed a wet wipe from the bedside table and vigorously scrubbed the blue ink from my thumb. My mind was racing, calculating the exact timeline of what was about to happen. They thought they had just outsmarted a woman whose entire career revolved around catching people much smarter and much more dangerous than them. They thought I was a naive, overworked wife who simply crunched numbers all day. They had no idea I had been building a cage around them for 6 months. I reached under my pillow and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my encrypted banking application and watched the dashboard load. A bright red notification instantly popped up on the screen. "Wire transfer of $850,000 initiated. Processing." A cold smile spread across my face. They actually did it. They took the bait perfectly right on schedule. Before I could message my lawyer, a new text message lit up my screen. It was from Jamal. Jamal was 36, an African-American man with a heart of gold. He was a brilliant and devoted veterinarian who had built a highly successful animal clinic from the ground up. He also had the misfortune of being married to Melanie, my entitled 32-year-old sister-in-law. Jamal was a loving father and a genuinely good person, which meant Melanie and Barbara treated him with the same subtle disrespect they reserved for me. They gladly spent his clinic profits while whispering behind his back that Melanie had settled for someone outside their elite social sphere. Over the years, Jamal and I had formed a quiet alliance, silently supporting each other through the grueling endurance test of family holidays. I opened his message. "Natalie, are you okay? I saw Melanie slip something into your wine glass last night when you went to the kitchen. I did not realize what it was until you collapsed. I am leaving the clinic now. I am coming to the hospital right now. Tell me you are safe." I stared at the glowing words on my screen. Melanie had been the one to drug me, acting as the eager accomplice to her mother and brother's grand heist. They had all colluded to poison me, steal my fingerprint, and drain my accounts, fully believing there would be zero consequences. I quickly typed a response to Jamal. I am perfectly fine. Do not come to the hospital. Go straight to the coffee shop on Elm Street and wait for me in the back booth. We need to talk. Bring your laptop. I sent the text, swung my legs over the side of the hospital bed, and began peeling the medical tape holding my IV line in place. It was time to leave this sterile room. The trap had been successfully sprung, and the timer was officially ticking. Spencer and Barbara thought they were walking away with my life savings, eager to fund their luxurious delusions. What they did not know was that the account they just drained was a carefully constructed financial landmine, and they had just handed me the detonator. The hospital staff tried to stop me. A frantic nurse chased me down the corridor, waving a clipboard shouting about medical advice and liability waivers. I grabbed a pen, scrawled my signature across the bottom of her form, and kept walking. The crisp morning air hit my face as I pushed through the sliding glass doors. I ordered a rideshare from my phone, my mind already 10 steps ahead. Spencer and Barbara thought they had executed the perfect crime. They had no idea they had just walked into a financial slaughterhouse. The drive to my suburban home took exactly 22 minutes. I spent every one of those minutes categorizing the evidence I had already compiled against them. For years, I had watched Spencer parade around our affluent neighborhood playing the role of a successful executive. I watched him buy a Porsche he could not afford. I watched him fund his mother's ridiculous country club luncheons, and I watched him do it all while secretly bleeding my accounts dry, or so he thought. I paid the driver, stepped out onto the manicured driveway, and walked up to the front door. My keys still worked, which meant Spencer had been too arrogant or too stupid to change the locks yet. I pushed the door open. The sheer scale of the destruction in my own home made me pause in the foyer. The living room looked like a hurricane had ripped through it. My custom velvet sofa cushions were tossed onto the floor. The mahogany bookshelves I had carefully curated were emptied, their contents shoved carelessly into cheap cardboard boxes. Books with broken spines lay scattered across the Persian rug. My antique floor lamp was knocked over, its stained glass shade cracked. And sitting right in the middle of the chaos, her feet propped up on my glass coffee table, was Melanie. My 32-year-old sister-in-law was scrolling through her phone, a bored expression on her heavily contoured face. She wore a silk robe that I instantly recognized as my own one I had bought during a business trip to Milan. But what caught my attention was the glint of gold on her left wrist. It was my custom Cartier watch, the one I had purchased for myself after closing my first $1 million consulting contract. Melanie did not even flinch when she saw me standing in the doorway. She slowly lowered her phone and offered a lazy, triumphant smirk. "Oh, you are alive." She said it with genuine disappointment, inspecting her freshly manicured nails. "Spencer said the hospital might keep you for a few days. Food poisoning can be so unpredictable." I stepped fully into the room, my eyes sweeping over the devastation. "You have been busy, Melanie." She stood up, adjusting the belt of my silk robe. "We have. Spencer is selling this house. He needs liquid capital to fund his new startup, and this place is just dead weight now. I packed your cheap clothes in garbage bags. They are sitting in the garage where they belong. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Mom already called the real estate agent to list the property by Friday." I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing a single ounce of panic on my face. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was nothing new. I walked past her, ignoring the mess on the floor, and headed straight into the kitchen. I opened the cabinet, took out a crystal glass, and turned on the faucet. The sound of the running water seemed unusually loud in the tense silence of the house. I filled the glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You always loved taking things you did not earn, Melanie," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Just like when you cried to Spencer to pay off your $40,000 credit card debt right after our wedding. You maxed out 5 different cards on designer shoes and luxury vacations because you wanted to pretend you were a reality television star and you expected him to fix it. He used my money to bail you out because you could not hold down a job for more than 3 weeks. Melanie laughed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Family takes care of family, Natalie. That is how it works. Spencer is a generous man. It is too bad you are not family anymore. You are just a guest whose welcome has officially worn out. I took another sip of water, watching her preen. You really think you have won, do you not? I asked softly. I think I am wearing a $20,000 watch in a house my brother is about to sell out from under you, she countered, tapping the Cartier face with a perfectly shaped nail. I would say we won the moment you signed that power of attorney. You always thought you were the smartest person in the room just because you stare at spreadsheets all day. But you are just a glorified human calculator. And calculators do not know how to fight back against real power. I smiled, a genuine chilling smile. Keep the watch, Melanie. It looks much better with your fake tan anyway. But I strongly suggest you check the balances on your joint credit cards with Jamal. Your husband might not be as blind to your little shopping sprees as you think he is. Before she could ask what I meant by that, the heavy oak front door swung open and slammed shut. Spencer marched into the foyer, his expensive Italian leather shoes echoing sharply on the hardwood floor. He looked flushed, his chest heaving slightly, riding the high of what he believed was his ultimate victory. He stopped when he saw me standing in the kitchen. For a brief second, a flash of genuine surprise crossed his face. The doctors had assured him I would be incapacitated until at least the evening. But he quickly recovered, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket and adopting his usual posture of arrogant authority. Look who decided to join the land of the living, he said, striding into the kitchen. He dropped his heavy leather briefcase onto the marble island with a loud thud. You should be in bed, Natalie. You look terrible. I set my water glass down next to his briefcase. And you look like a man who just committed federal wire fraud. Spencer let out a sharp, barking laugh. He unzipped his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He tossed them onto the marble counter right in front of me. The bold black letters across the top page read, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. I have the power of attorney, Natalie, he said, his voice dropping an octave to deliver his threat. I went to the bank this morning. I took the $850,000. The accounts are empty. I moved everything to an offshore holding company for my new startup. You have absolutely nothing left. I looked down at the divorce papers, then back up at him. Spencer leaned over the island, planting his hands firmly on the marble, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. The rules of this game have changed. He continued, a vicious gleam in his eyes. You are going to sign these divorce papers right now. You are going to walk away quietly without asking for alimony, without asking for the house, and without fighting me on a single asset. If you try to fight me, if you try to drag this out, I will use your own money to bury you in court. I will drag you through years of litigation until you cannot even afford a public defender. I will ruin your precious consulting career and make sure nobody in this city ever hires you again. Melanie hovered in the doorway of the living room, watching the exchange with undisguised glee. She was waiting for me to break down. She was waiting for the tears, the begging, the desperate pleas for my money back. She wanted a show of brokenness to validate her own superiority. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my favorite Mont Blanc pen. I did not flip through the pages. I did not read the terms of the settlement. I did not review the division of assets or the carefully crafted clauses his expensive lawyer had undoubtedly spent hours writing to ensure I was left destitute. I simply flipped to the very last page, uncapped my pen, and signed my name on the dotted line with a smooth, elegant flourish. I placed the pen down and pushed the signed document back across the marble island. Spencer stared at the paper, utterly bewildered. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He had expected a war. He had geared himself up for a screaming match, a hysterical breakdown, a dramatic refusal that would allow him to flex his newfound power. He did not know how to process total immediate surrender. I looked him dead in the eyes, leaning slightly closer so he could hear the absolute certainty in my voice. It is all yours, Spencer. Every dirty penny. I walked past him, grabbing my purse from the counter. Enjoy the money while you still can. I did not wait to see his reaction. I walked out the front door, leaving them standing in the wreckage of a house they thought they owned, clutching money they thought they had stolen. As I walked down the driveway, the cool afternoon breeze felt entirely different than it had that morning. It felt like freedom. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened my messaging application. Jamal was waiting for my signal. The true game was only just beginning, and Spencer had blindly walked directly onto the board I had designed. The true game was only just beginning, and Spencer had blindly walked directly onto the board I had designed. I kept my pace steady as I walked down the tree-lined avenue, putting exactly 4 blocks between myself and the house before I hailed another ride. I directed the driver to a small independent coffee roaster on the industrial side of town. It was the kind of place Barbara and Melanie would never be caught dead in, making it the perfect location for a clandestine meeting. I walked through the heavy glass door. The sharp scent of roasted espresso beans hit me instantly. I scanned the dimly lit room and spotted Jamal sitting in a back corner booth. He was a large, imposing man whose usual warm demeanor was entirely absent today. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle feathered beneath his skin. He wore his dark green veterinary scrubs, having clearly rushed straight over from his clinic. When he saw me approach, he stood up immediately. He did not offer a polite greeting. He did not ask how my food poisoning was. He looked at my pale face and the slight tremor in my hands that I could not quite hide. "Natalie, are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with suppressed rage. "I swear to God, when I saw Melanie slipping that powder into your glass last night, I thought I was losing my mind. I confronted her this morning and she just laughed. She told me Spencer was taking back his money and that I needed to mind my own business. I was about to call the police when I got your text." I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my posture rigid and professional. "Do not call the police, Jamal. Not yet. If you call them now, Melanie and Spencer will just spin a story about a misunderstanding or a bad reaction to prescription medication. Barbara will hire a crisis management team, and they will paint me as a hysterical, vengeful ex-wife. We do not strike until we can guarantee absolute destruction." Jamal sat back down heavily, running a large hand over his closely cropped hair. "I cannot believe I am married to someone capable of poisoning another human being just for a payout." He shook his head, looking exhausted. "They threw you out of your own house, Natalie. They stole your savings. We have to do something." I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I placed it squarely in the center of the wooden table between us. I patted the top of it once. "I am not a victim, Jamal," I said calmly. "And that money Spencer took was not my life savings. It was a trap. But we are not here to talk about Spencer. We are here to talk about your wife." Jamal frowned, staring at the envelope as if it might explode. "What is this?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "You need to see this, Jamal. I did not just audit Spencer." I looked into Melanie. He reached out slowly and broke the wax seal on the envelope. He pulled out a stack of financial documents, bank statements, and printed photographs. I watched his face as he began to read. I knew exactly what he was looking at. As a forensic data analyst, finding hidden money was my specialty. For the past 6 months, while Spencer thought I was blindly paying the mortgage, I had been running deep background checks on every single member of his toxic family. Jamal flipped to the second page and the color drained completely from his face. "These are the operating accounts for my veterinary clinic," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you get these?" "I bypassed the standard encryption on Melanie's shared devices," I explained smoothly. "She is incredibly lazy with her passwords. She uses her own birthday for everything. Look at the highlighted transfer columns on page 3, Jamal." He flipped the page. His eyes scanned the rows of numbers darting back and forth as the reality of the math hit him. I had highlighted dozens of wire transfers, all moving from his clinic's primary operating fund into a private, untraceable offshore account under a shell company name. "She has been bleeding your business dry for over 2 years," I said, keeping my tone objective and clinical. "Every time you told her you needed to work late to cover rising medical supply costs, it was because she was actively draining your profit margins. She embezzled over $140,000 right under your nose." Jamal gripped the edges of the paper so hard his knuckles turned white. His breathing grew heavy and ragged. He dropped the papers onto the table and buried his face in his hands. Barbara always told Melanie she married down because I am a black man working with animals instead of a Wall Street banker. Jamal said, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with years of repressed humiliation. From the day we got engaged, Barbara made sure to remind me that I lacked the proper pedigree for her daughter. But Melanie swore she did not care about their snobbery. She swore she loved me for who I was. He looked up, his eyes burning with a mixture of betrayal and raw fury. I built that clinic from the ground up, Natalie. I worked 80-hour weeks. I missed my own children's school plays because I was busy covering emergency surgeries to keep us afloat. I gave her everything. I bought her the luxury cars she demanded to keep up with Spencer. I paid for the designer clothes so she would not feel left out at her mother's ridiculous country club galas, and she was stealing from me the whole time. I nodded, letting him process the betrayal. It is worse than just theft, Jamal. Melanie is not just funding a lavish lifestyle. Look at the photographs attached to the back of the file. Jamal reached for the stack again. He pulled out 3 glossy 8x10 photographs I had captured using a private investigator I hired last month. The photos showed Melanie walking out of a high-end luxury condominium complex downtown. In the second photo, she was intimately kissing a young athletic man wearing an expensive tailored suit. Jamal stared at the images, his jaw locking. He is barely out of college, Jamal noted with disgust. His name is Chase. I provided, reciting the facts from memory. He is a 22-year-old personal trainer. Melanie has been paying for his entire life using your clinic's embezzled funds. She bought him that suit. She bought him the Rolex on his wrist. Jamal threw the photos back onto the table. I am filing for divorce today. I am taking the kids and I am locking her out of every account we share. I will have my lawyer draft the papers before noon. Do not do that, I commanded, leaning across the table to ensure he caught my intensity. If you do that now, she will panic. She will run to Spencer and Barbara, and they will pool their resources to destroy you in family court. They will use the money Spencer just stole from me to hire the most vicious custody lawyers in the state. They will drag your name through the mud and try to take your children away just to punish you for daring to stand up to them. Jamal glared at me. So what am I supposed to do? Go home and smile at the woman who poisoned you and robbed my business blind? I took a slow breath, preparing to deliver the final devastating piece of the puzzle. I need you to play the devoted husband for just a few more days, Jamal. Because Melanie is not just having an affair. The rabbit hole goes much deeper than a personal trainer. Look at the lease agreement on the last page of that dossier. Jamal pulled out the final document. It was a commercial residential lease for the luxury condo featured in the photographs. He scanned the renter details, and his brow furrowed in confusion. The lease is under a corporate holding name, he said, looking up at me. I do not understand. Look at the guarantor's signature at the bottom, I instructed. Jamal's eyes tracked down the page. He froze. He read the signature once, twice, and then a third time just to be absolutely certain. The anger that had been boiling just beneath the surface of his skin suddenly vanished, replaced by an ice-cold, terrifying realization. Spencer, Jamal whispered. Spencer is the guarantor on the lease for the condo where Melanie is taking her lover. I nodded, tapping my finger against the polished wood of the table. Your wife is using your hard-earned clinic money to pay the lease on a luxury condo. But it is not just a love nest for her and the personal trainer. It is a shared asset. She is splitting the cost of that apartment with Spencer. Jamal looked at me completely horrified. Why would she do that? Because Spencer's mistress lives in that exact same condo, I revealed, letting the absolute depravity of their family dynamic settle over him. Spencer and Melanie are covering for each other. Melanie embezzles from your veterinary clinic to pay half the rent, and Spencer uses the money he steals from his company to pay the other half. They use the condo as a private playground for their respective affairs, keeping the asset entirely off the books, so neither you nor I would ever find a paper trail linking them to the property. They have been laughing at us behind our backs for years, Jamal. They think we are nothing but oblivious, hardworking cash cows meant to fund their degenerate lifestyles. Jamal sat in absolute silence for a full minute. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was an incredibly smart man, a doctor who understood precision and patience. He was visualizing the sheer scale of the betrayal, mapping out every lie his wife had told him. Every late night Spencer claimed he was at a sales conference, every time Barbara had praised her children's flawless marriages at family dinners. They were all in on it. The entire family was a cesspool of fraud, infidelity, and arrogance. When Jamal finally looked up at me, the warm, compassionate veterinarian I had known for 7 years was gone. The man sitting across from me now was a weapon stripped of all mercy and primed for absolute retaliation. His eyes were ice-cold, devoid of any hesitation or fear. He carefully gathered the documents, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into the manila envelope. He placed his hands flat on the table, leaning in close. "What is the plan, Natalie?" Jamal asked, his voice steady and dangerously calm. "Tell me what to do." The transition from the coffee shop to my attorney's office was a blur of calculated anticipation. I had left Jamal with the manila envelope and strict instructions to maintain his composure. "You go back to the clinic," I told him, pushing the files firmly into his hands. "You act like absolutely nothing is wrong. You kiss your wife, you ask about her day, and you do not give her a single reason to suspect that you know she is destroying your livelihood. I need 48 hours to pull the net completely shut." Jamal had stared at the envelope for a heavy second before tucking it under his arm. He stood up, his posture completely transformed from a defeated husband into a man preparing for war. He gave me a single sharp nod and walked out without looking back. Now, 20 minutes later, I stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. I walked straight past the receptionist and pushed open the heavy mahogany door to my attorney's office. David was standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city skyline. He was a ruthless corporate litigator who wore $1,000 suits and treated legal battles like a blood sport. He turned around as I entered, pointing a silver pen at his massive dual monitors. "He actually took it," David said, shaking his head in a mixture of disbelief and pure amusement. "The wire transfer cleared an hour ago." Spencer drained the entire account. $850,000 moved across state lines into a newly formed corporate holding account in Delaware. I dropped my purse onto one of the leather guest chairs and walked around his desk to look at the screen. The bank records were displayed in stark black and white. Spencer had used the forged power of attorney to authorize the transfer. He had executed the transaction in person, leaving a crystal-clear paper trail straight back to himself. "He thinks he just stole my life savings," I said, leaning over the desk to review the routing numbers. "He thinks he left me destitute." David let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "He actually used a forged power of attorney to wire stolen corporate funds across state lines. He always did think he was the smartest guy in the room." I smiled, feeling a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. Spencer had spent our entire marriage constantly belittling my intelligence. Whenever we attended his lavish corporate dinner parties, he would introduce me to his wealthy colleagues with a condescending pat on the back. He would tell them not to bother me with complex business discussions because I was just a glorified human calculator who stared at boring spreadsheets all day. He thought my job was nothing more than adding and subtracting columns of numbers for low-level clients. He had no idea that forensic accounting meant I tracked international money laundering syndicates and corporate embezzlement rings for a living. And he certainly had no idea that the moment I suspected he was hiding money from me, I turned my professional crosshairs directly onto my own household. "Let us review the timeline for the federal authorities," David said, pulling up a fresh document on his screen. "Walk me through the honeypot one more time to ensure our sequence of events is airtight before I make the call to the FBI." I stood up straight, crossing my arms as I recited the trap I had spent 6 months building. "Spencer is the regional sales director for a massive tech logistics firm run by a CEO named Mr. Caldwell." I began, keeping my voice clinical and precise. "About a year ago, I noticed discrepancies in our household income. Spencer was bringing home less money, but buying expensive watches and leasing luxury cars. When I asked him about it, he claimed his commission structure had changed and he was just spending his base salary. But the math did not add up, so I ran a discreet audit on his accounts. And you found out he was stealing from his boss, David prompted, typing rapidly on his keyboard. Exactly, I confirmed. Spencer created 3 fake vendor companies. He was generating fraudulent invoices for phantom logistical services and submitting them to Mr. Caldwell's accounting department. Because Spencer was the regional director, he had the authority to approve his own vendor invoices up to $50,000 without triggering an executive review. He was systematically skimming corporate funds and funneling them into a shadow account. David nodded, pulling up a secondary banking file. But he did not know you found the shadow account. No, I said. Spencer is incredibly careless with his digital security. He left his laptop logged into his personal banking portal while he went to play golf. I found the shadow account containing $850,000 of Mr. Caldwell's stolen money, but I could not just report him right then. If I did, he would have drained the account, hidden the cash in crypto, and claimed I fabricated the evidence because we were having marital problems. I needed him to definitively tie himself to the stolen money in a way he could never deny. So you created the honeypot, David said, leaning back in his chair with a look of deep professional admiration. I created the honeypot. I agreed. I quietly transferred the $850,000 out of his shadow account and moved it into a highly secure, restricted account under my own name. I named it as a joint marital savings fund. I knew Spencer would eventually realize the money was missing from his hidden account. I also knew his ego would never allow him to confront me directly, because doing so would force him to admit he was embezzling from his employer. Instead, he waited for an opportunity to steal it back. David noted, gesturing to the forged power of attorney document lying on his desk. And his mother and sister helped him do it. They drugged my wine at a family dinner, I said, my voice hardening at the memory of the hospital room. They sent me to the emergency room, slipped a forged legal document under my thumb while I was incapacitated, and used it to authorize a massive wire transfer. They thought they were outsmarting me. They thought they were taking back Spencer's hard-earned money and leaving me with nothing. David picked up the power of attorney and examined the ink thumbprint. By wiring the money out of your account, using a fraudulent document, they just committed federal wire fraud. By moving stolen corporate funds across state lines, they committed interstate money laundering. And by signing that waiver at the deposition earlier today, you formally relinquished any legal claim to that money, completely insulating yourself from the fallout. Spencer just took full exclusive legal ownership of nearly $1 million in stolen corporate funds. It is the perfect crime. I said, a slow smile returning to my face. The only problem is, they committed it against themselves. The heavy silence in the office was suddenly broken by the sharp, persistent ringing of my cell phone. I reached into my purse and pulled it out. The caller ID flashed on the screen. It was Barbara. I held the phone up so David could see the name. He raised an eyebrow and tapped a button on his desk console to activate the room's high-fidelity recording system. I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone, placing the device gently onto the mahogany desk. Hello, Barbara, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral and polite. Natalie, be a dear and do not try to cancel the country club gala this weekend. Barbara's voice echoed through the office, dripping with malicious satisfaction. I know you are probably feeling quite bitter about the current state of your living arrangements, but business must go on. I glanced at David, who was silently shaking his head with a wide grin. What makes you think I would cancel the gala, Barbara? Well, since you are currently homeless and completely bankrupt, I assumed you might try to call the event director and cry about your financial ruin? She gloated, her tone practically vibrating with joy. But Spencer just paid the $100,000 hosting fee directly to the club's event management team. We used a certified cashier's check from our new account. The startup launch is going to be the social event of the season. They had actually done it. They had taken the stolen corporate funds and immediately started spending them on massive, highly visible luxury events. They were leaving a neon trail of evidence straight to the fraud. That is very generous of Spencer, I replied smoothly, ensuring the recording caught every word of her admission. A $100,000 hosting fee is quite a steep price for a simple dinner party. It is not a simple dinner party, Natalie, Barbara snapped, insulted by my deliberate understatement. Mr. Caldwell and all the senior executives from Spencer's logistics firm will be in attendance. We are rolling out the red carpet to impress them. Spencer is going to announce his new private venture, and we are expecting major capital investments from the board. It is a high society function. You would not understand the intricacies of elite networking. I understand perfectly, I said, tracing the edge of David's desk with my finger. Good, Barbara sneered. And Natalie, since you are currently unemployed and out on the street, you can come serve hors d'oeuvres if you need the cash. I am sure the catering manager can find a spare apron for you. Just make sure you use the service entrance in the back. We do not want you upsetting the actual guests. I looked at David. He gave me a subtle nod, confirming we had everything we needed. The trap was set, the bait was swallowed, and the perpetrators were eagerly building the stage for their own public execution. Enjoy the party, Barbara, I replied, my voice steady and sweet. I hope the IRS is on your guest list. I ended the call before she could respond. The silence rushed back into the room, heavy with anticipation. David reached across his desk, turned off the recording system, and began saving the audio file to an encrypted external server. He looked up at me, adjusting his cuffs with clinical precision. Are we ready to pull the trigger? David asked. I picked up my purse and slipped the phone back inside. Send the entire dossier to Mr. Caldwell, I instructed. Include the fake vendor invoices, the offshore routing numbers, and the audio recording of Barbara confirming they used his stolen money to pay for his own company gala. And David, yes, Natalie, make sure the FBI Financial Crimes Division gets a copy of that forged power of attorney by tomorrow morning. I want agents waiting in the wings before the first bottle of champagne is popped. Consider it done, David said, turning back to his monitors. I walked out of the office and headed for the elevator. Spencer and Barbara thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had secured their place in high society. They had absolutely no clue that this weekend their precious country club gala was going to become a federal crime scene. The elevator doors slid shut on David's gleaming mahogany office, but my mind was already recalibrating for the next tactical maneuver. I had the legal snare perfectly positioned for the upcoming country club gala, but I urgently needed my physical files. The encrypted hard drives I kept hidden beneath the floorboards in my home office contained the final unredacted ledgers of Spencer's corporate embezzlement. They were the absolute nail in his coffin, and I was not about to leave them sitting in a house currently occupied by thieves. I ordered a private car service, instructing the driver to take me back to the suburban neighborhood I had financed with my own blood, sweat, and lucrative consulting fees. The drive was remarkably quiet, giving me ample time to review the digital copies of the property deeds on my encrypted smartphone. Spencer genuinely believed his name on the original mortgage application gave him absolute, unquestionable dominion over the estate. His staggering financial illiteracy was going to be his spectacular undoing. As the black sedan turned onto my tree-lined street, the tranquil illusion of our manicured neighborhood was violently shattered by the sight of a massive, idling moving truck parked directly across my driveway. I paid the driver, stepped out onto the cold asphalt, and took in the chaotic scene unfolding on my front lawn. My pristine, award-winning landscaping was currently serving as a dumping ground. Dozens of cardboard boxes, hastily taped and bulging at the seams, were scattered recklessly across the green grass. A few had burst open upon impact, spilling my expensive winter coats, delicate silk blouses, and framed college degrees directly into the dirt. Two burly movers in sweat-stained gray shirts were marching heavily down the front steps, carrying my antique cedar chest like it was a cheap piece of disposable firewood. And standing at the very top of the porch, orchestrating the entire desecration with a manicured hand, was Barbara. She wore a tailored beige pantsuit and clutched a wooden clipboard, barking relentless orders at the exhausted workmen with the shrill, demanding authority of a dictator. I walked slowly up the driveway, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete. The sharp sound cut directly through the low rumbling of the moving truck's engine. Barbara snapped her head in my direction. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second in pure shock before hardening into a triumphant, malicious glare. I reached the bottom of the porch steps and looked directly at the front door. The solid brass deadbolt had been entirely replaced with a cheap, shiny silver lock. She had actually called a professional locksmith to break into my home. "I told you you are out!" Barbara shouted, her voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street, practically begging the neighbors to watch her victory. "This is my son's property. He is the man of the house, and he has revoked your access. You signed the divorce papers, Natalie. You surrendered your rights. Now take your pathetic trash off my manicured lawn before I call the sanitation department to haul it directly to the city dump where it belongs." I did not raise my voice. I did not scramble frantically to pick up my scattered belongings from the dirt. I simply walked up the wooden steps, forcing Barbara to take a slight involuntary step backward to maintain her personal space. She preened aggressively, adjusting the heavy string of pearls around her wrinkled neck, desperately trying to project an air of aristocratic dominance over me. "I did the exact same thing to Spencer's first fiancée when she got too greedy," Barbara sneered, leaning in incredibly close so only I could hear the pure venom dripping in her voice. She thought she could come into this prominent family and dictate how my successful son spent his hard-earned money. I had the locks changed on her apartment while she was at work and threw her cheap, ugly furniture into the alley. "Women like you are temporary, Natalie. You are just disposable placeholders. The family estate is forever, and it belongs exclusively to the bloodline." I stared at her, marveling at the sheer unfathomable depth of her delusion. Spencer's first fiancée had not been greedy in the slightest. She had been a smart, highly capable woman who noticed thousands of dollars mysteriously disappearing from her joint accounts to secretly fund Barbara's massive underground gambling debts. I knew this specific detail because I had forensically audited Spencer's entire financial history down to the absolute last penny. Barbara had ruthlessly chased that poor woman away to protect her own parasitic, luxurious lifestyle, and she had spent the last 7 years aggressively trying to do the exact same thing to me. But I was not a naive, easily manipulated 20-something girl, intimidated by a suburban matriarch with fake pearls and a heavily leased Mercedes. I was a senior forensic data analyst who systematically tore apart international criminal syndicates for a living. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Barbara," I said, keeping my tone unnervingly calm and quiet. "The family estate is forever. It just does not belong to your family." I reached deep into my coat pocket and pressed a single discreet button on a remote key fob. 2 houses down, tucked perfectly out of sight behind a large ancient oak tree, the flashing blue and red lights of a waiting police cruiser suddenly flared to life. The heavy vehicle rolled slowly down the quiet street, its thick tires crunching loudly over the fallen autumn leaves before pulling directly up to the curb, effectively blocking the moving truck from leaving. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out of the cruiser, their hands resting casually but firmly on their black duty belts. Barbara's triumphant, arrogant smirk faltered instantly, replaced by a sudden sharp wave of genuine confusion. She glanced frantically at the approaching officers, then darted her eyes back to me. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice entirely losing its shrill, commanding edge. "Did you actually call the police to escort you off the premises? Because I have the fully executed power of attorney documents right here on this clipboard." I completely ignored her frantic questions and walked gracefully down the porch steps to meet the approaching officers. I pulled a pristine sealed legal folder from my structured leather tote bag and handed it directly to the senior officer. "Officer Davis, thank you so much for waiting," I said smoothly, projecting absolute professional authority. "As we discussed on the phone earlier this morning, I am the sole verified legal owner of this commercial property. The individuals currently standing on the porch and the hired movers operating the truck are currently trespassing on my land." The officer opened the thick folder and carefully reviewed the notarized documents inside. Barbara scrambled frantically down the wooden steps, waving her clipboard aggressively in the air. "This is completely absurd!" she yelled, her voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "My son bought this beautiful house. His name is clearly printed on the original mortgage documents. He has the absolute legal right to evict her from the premises." Officer Davis held up a stern-gloved hand to immediately silence her outburst. "Actually, ma'am, that is entirely incorrect. According to this highly authenticated notarized deed, the original mortgage was paid off in full and legally transferred over 2 months ago. The property you are standing on is officially owned by Apex Holdings, LLC. I turned slowly to face Barbara, allowing a cold, deeply calculated smile to finally break across my stoic face. Spencer never bothered to actually read the complex refinancing paperwork I asked him to sign back in October. I explained slowly, watching the remaining color drain completely from her aging face. He was entirely too busy rushing out the door to play golf at your country club to look at the legal fine print. I bought out the remaining balance of the underwater mortgage using my own private offshore capital. I subsequently transferred the total uncontested ownership of the property to an LLC, and I am the sole exclusive managing director of that corporate entity. Spencer does not own a single solitary brick of this house. He is technically classified as a month-to-month tenant, and because he foolishly attempted to illegally change the locks on the documented property owner, his tenancy is now effectively and legally terminated. Officer Davis turned his attention to the two burly movers who were standing completely frozen on the lawn, still holding a heavy taped box of my expensive winter coats. "Put the box down and step away from the property immediately," the officer commanded with unmistakable authority. "You are actively participating in an illegal, unauthorized lockout." The movers immediately dropped the heavy box onto the grass and backed away quickly, holding their calloused hands up in total surrender. "We just got hired through an internet app, man. We don't want any legal trouble today." Barbara was visibly hyperventilating now. Her chest heaved dramatically beneath her tailored suit as she stared at the official deed resting in the police officer's hands. "No," she stammered, shaking her head in fierce, desperate denial. "No, that is absolutely impossible. Spencer has the power of attorney. He legally controls all of your financial assets." "The power of attorney only covers standard personal accounts strictly in my name, Barbara," I said, driving the final, devastating conceptual blade directly into her chest. "It does not grant him any access to private corporate entities. You and your embezzling son are officially trespassing on private commercial property. You have exactly 2 minutes to vacate these premises entirely before I have you arrested and booked for breaking and entering." Officer Davis stepped aggressively toward Barbara, gesturing firmly toward the street. "You need to leave the area right now, ma'am. If you step foot on this property again, you will be taken into police custody." Barbara's eyes darted wildly around the ruined lawn, looking at the scattered cardboard boxes, the quickly retreating movers, and the impassive, unyielding faces of the police officers. The brutal reality of her total, humiliating defeat was crashing down on her all at once, shattering her carefully constructed aristocratic facade into a million pathetic pieces. But like a desperate, cornered animal facing imminent destruction, she lashed out with one final chaotic maneuver. She spun around wildly and lunged up the porch steps, heading straight for the small wrought iron table positioned near the front door. My heart skipped a crucial beat. I had accidentally left my emergency backup drive sitting on that table when I rushed out of the house this morning to go to the hospital. It was a small, silver, highly encrypted flash drive containing the raw data backups of Spencer's illegal offshore routing numbers. Barbara snatched the silver flash drive from the table, clutching it tightly to her chest like a physical lifeline. She backed away toward the far edge of the porch, her face twisted into an ugly, manic, victorious snarl. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. "I know exactly what you are doing," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical, unhinged desperation. "You think you can just take everything from us. But I saw you working on this drive last night. I know you hide your digital money on these things. I have your crypto keys, you little witch. You are not going to get a single cent of it back." She turned rapidly and sprinted clumsily across the lawn, shoving violently past the police officers and scrambling frantically into her leased Mercedes. She slammed the heavy car door, gunned the powerful engine, and sped recklessly down the street, leaving thick black tire marks burning on the asphalt. I stood silently on the driveway, watching her bright red taillights disappear quickly around the corner. She had just stolen a heavily encrypted federal evidence file, absolutely convinced she now held the exclusive digital keys to my hidden wealth. I looked calmly at Officer Davis, who was staring down the empty street in utter complete bewilderment. "Let her go," I said softly, a dark smile playing on my lips. She just added grand larceny to her son's expanding list of federal charges. Across town on the penthouse floor of the Grand Fairmont Hotel, the atmosphere was a suffocating mixture of unearned arrogance and simmering panic. Spencer had booked the sprawling three-bedroom luxury suite, using the corporate funds he had stolen just 48 hours prior. The room was an ostentatious display of wealth, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a white marble wet bar and velvet furnishings that cost more than most people earned in a decade. It was meant to be their temporary palace while the new startup launched, and the country club gala solidified their elite status. Instead, it was rapidly becoming a gilded cage. Barbara burst through the heavy double doors of the suite, her breathing ragged and her tailored suit rumpled from her frantic escape. She slammed the door shut, leaning her back against the polished mahogany, clutching her designer handbag as if it contained the crown jewels. Spencer and Melanie looked up from the velvet sectional sofa where they had been aggressively scrolling through their phones. Spencer stood up, smoothing the front of his expensive vest. He walked over to the marble wet bar and grabbed a heavy crystal decanter filled with aged single malt scotch. He splashed a generous amount into 2 glasses, sliding one across the counter to his sister. Melanie took it without a word, her eyes still glued to her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that her own husband was currently working with me to dismantle her entire life. Spencer took a long, aggressive swallow of his scotch, the amber liquid burning down his throat. His face was flushed with a dangerous cocktail of bruised ego and toxic entitlement. He slammed the crystal glass onto the marble countertop, the sharp crack echoing through the cavernous suite. "I was the man of that house," Spencer rants to Melanie, his voice escalating into a furious snarl. He began pacing the length of the room, his leather shoes sinking into the thick carpet. "She kept hiding money from me, acting like she was the boss, just because she sat at a computer running numbers all day. She paid the mortgage, sure, but she did it to emasculate me. She wanted to hold it over my head. It is time I take back what a husband is owed." Melanie nodded lazily, taking a delicate sip from her glass. "She never respected you, Spencer. She never understood how high society works or what it takes to maintain our family image. She was just a working-class girl playing dress-up. You deserve every penny you took from her accounts. It is compensation for putting up with her sterile, boring personality for 7 years." Their shared delusion was practically an art form. They fed off each other's narcissism, reinforcing their warped reality, where they were the perpetual victims of my supposed tyranny. Spencer truly believed that by stealing from his employer and attempting to leave me destitute, he was simply reclaiming his rightful position at the top of the food chain. He viewed my financial independence not as a partnership, but as a direct threat to his masculinity. Barbara finally caught her breath and pushed herself away from the door. She marched into the center of the living room, a wild, manic grin stretching across her aging face. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her prize. It was the small silver flash drive she had snatched from my porch table. She held it up to the light, letting the metallic casing catch the glare of the crystal chandelier. "Do not worry about the house," Barbara announced, her voice trembling with adrenaline and greed. "The house is just a brick box. Natalie thinks she outsmarted us with her little LLC trick, but she made a fatal mistake. She left this sitting right on the table." Spencer stopped pacing and stared at the small device. "What is it?" "It is her secret stash," Barbara declared triumphantly. "I saw her plugging this exact drive into her laptop late last night." "You know how these tech people are, Spencer. They do not keep their real money in traditional banks. They hide it in cryptocurrency. Millions of dollars completely untraceable, locked away on hardware wallets just like this one. She was probably planning to use it to fund her new life after the divorce. But I took it. I have her crypto keys." Spencer's eyes widened, the lingering frustration over the house instantly evaporating, replaced by a blinding, insatiable greed. The prospect of millions of dollars in untraceable digital currency completely bypassed any logical reasoning he might have possessed. He did not stop to question why a cautious forensic data analyst would leave a hardware wallet containing millions of dollars sitting casually on a patio table. He only saw the money. He only saw his ultimate victory. "Give it to me," Spencer commanded, holding out his hand. Barbara dropped the silver drive into his palm. Spencer practically ran to the dining table where his sleek, high-end laptop was already open and running. Melanie set her drink down and followed him, peering eagerly over his shoulder. The three of them clustered around the glowing screen, a picture of familial corruption united by their shared desire to ruin me. Spencer sat down, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He took a steadying breath, savoring the moment of his perceived triumph. With a swift, decisive motion, he pushed the silver flash drive directly into the USB port of his laptop. A small notification chimed. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second. A gray window popped up displaying a standard loading bar. "It is encrypting," Spencer whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "It is establishing a secure connection. We just need to wait for the prompt to bypass the security wall. Once we are in, I am routing every single digital coin straight into the offshore account I set up yesterday. She will be left with absolutely nothing." 10 miles away, I was sitting in the heavily fortified sub-basement of David's law firm. We had converted a secure conference room into a temporary digital command center. The walls were soundproofed, and the internet connection was routed through a military-grade encrypted network. I sat in a high-backed ergonomic chair, staring intensely at a massive curved monitor. A steaming cup of black coffee sat untouched beside my keyboard. The silver flash drive Barbara had stolen was not a cryptocurrency hardware wallet. It was not a storage device for digital funds. It was a custom-built, highly aggressive digital payload known in cybersecurity circles as a rubber ducky. I had spent 3 days meticulously programming it. It was designed to look identical to a high-end encrypted storage drive, complete with the weight and metallic finish that screamed security. But its actual function was entirely offensive. The moment Spencer plugged that drive into his active computer, he bypassed his own firewall. The drive was programmed to execute a hidden macro the instant it detected an operating system. It did not need a password. It did not need permissions. It acted as a digital beacon, opening a silent, invisible backdoor directly into the core of his hard drive. A sudden, sharp chime echoed through the quiet conference room. The massive, curved monitor in front of me instantly lit up. Lines of green code began scrolling rapidly across the black screen, cascading downward like digital rain. I placed my hands on the keyboard, my fingers flying across the keys with practiced, ruthless precision. "We are in," I said softly. The sound of my own voice seemed loud in the sterile room. The hidden macro had executed flawlessly. Spencer's laptop, the central hub for his entire fraudulent empire, was now completely exposed to my network. I did not just have access to his files. I had total, unmitigated control over his entire digital existence. A series of organized folders bloomed across my screen. I bypassed his flimsy secondary passwords with a few rapid keystrokes. I opened the first directory. It was an absolute goldmine. Spencer had saved the login credentials, routing numbers, and digital tokens for the exact offshore holding accounts he had used to hide Mr. Caldwell's stolen corporate funds. He had even kept a meticulously detailed spreadsheet tracking the embezzled amounts, essentially writing his own federal confession and signing it with his own digital footprint. But that was not the ultimate prize. I navigated to a hidden encrypted messaging application buried deep within his system files. The macro ripped through the encryption protocol in seconds. Thousands of private messages flooded my screen in an unstoppable torrent of evidence. They were the communications between Spencer and his mistress. Pages upon pages of explicit text messages, hotel receipts, and digital transfers. But the most damning evidence was the financial cross-pollination. He was actively coordinating with Melanie, sending her money to cover the lease on the luxury condo they were both using to cheat on their respective spouses. He had documented the entire twisted arrangement, leaving a digital trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to their shared infidelity. I initiated a mass download protocol. The progress bar on my screen shot from 0 to 50% in a matter of seconds. Every stolen dollar, every lie, every hidden betrayal was being funneled directly onto my secure servers. Spencer had wanted to take everything from me. By plugging in that drive, he had just handed me the keys to his complete and total destruction. She downloads everything. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind Spencer and Harrison, sealing their catastrophic legal blunder into the official court record. David and I exchanged a single victorious glance. The federal trap was permanently locked around Spencer, but my work was far from finished. The second half of this synchronized demolition belonged exclusively to Jamal. I pulled out my encrypted smartphone and sent a secure message to his personal number. It was the green light. The final phase of our retaliation was officially in motion. I left the law firm and returned to my secure basement office, sliding into my ergonomic chair and activating my monitor bank. Jamal had asked me to monitor the upcoming confrontation for his own legal protection. He had discreetly installed a high-fidelity audio recording device in his kitchen ceiling. The hidden digital feed hummed to life on my screen, displaying the pristine modern kitchen of the home he shared with a woman who was actively trying to destroy him. Over the past 48 hours, Jamal had executed my instructions with absolute perfection. He had gone back to his veterinary clinic and acted like a loving, oblivious husband. His sudden emotional flatline, stripped of any jealousy, had completely unnerved her. Melanie thrived on drama and attention. When Jamal stopped reacting, she sensed him pulling away, and that triggered a massive, desperate panic. She needed liquidity, and she needed it immediately. Spencer had been feeding her lies about his impending wealth, but their shared lifestyle of luxury hotel suites required actual cash. With her own credit cards maxed out, she decided to forcefully liquidate Jamal's most valuable asset. I pulled up the regional review boards on my left monitor. Overnight, Jamal's highly respected independent veterinary clinic had been bombarded with a synchronized wave of devastating one-star reviews. They were vicious, fabricated accounts of botched surgeries and horrific animal neglect. The goal was transparently ruthless. Melanie wanted to manufacture a sudden, catastrophic public relations crisis that would destroy the clinic's reputation, forcing Jamal to panic and sell the practice at a fire sale price. Since they were married, she intended to demand half of the liquidation cash in the impending divorce, using it to fund her new life with Spencer. It was a venomous, calculated strategy, but she had made a critical mistake. She assumed the internet was anonymous. I had run a forensic trace on the reviews at Jamal's request. It took me exactly 14 minutes to bypass the cheap proxy servers she had utilized. Every single defamatory review, every fake account, and horrific accusation had been posted from the exact same dynamic IP address. I tracked that address directly to the cellular network data log of the burner phone Melanie currently kept hidden in her designer purse. I had compiled the definitive proof into a neat, undeniable digital packet and sent it to Jamal's tablet. On my main monitor, the video feed showed Melanie pacing nervously across her marble kitchen floor. She was clutching a glass of white wine, wearing expensive silk loungewear, purchased with Jamal's money. She was aggressively refreshing the digital review pages on her phone, watching the artificial destruction of her husband's livelihood with anxious, greedy anticipation. The heavy front door clicked open, and Jamal walked into the frame. He looked entirely different from the defeated man I had met in the coffee shop just days ago. His shoulders were squared, his posture was rigid, and his face was carved out of cold stone. He placed his heavy leather briefcase on the kitchen island and looked directly at his wife. Melanie immediately launched into her rehearsed theatrical performance. She rushed toward him, her face twisted into a mask of fake, exaggerated distress. "Jamal, it is a disaster!" Melanie cried, waving her phone frantically in his direction. "Have you looked online today? The clinic is being absolutely destroyed. There are dozens of horrible reviews everywhere. People are calling you a monster. You're going to lose all of your clients by tomorrow morning. We are going to be completely ruined." Jamal did not flinch. He did not drop his briefcase. He did not offer her a comforting embrace. He simply stood there staring at her with eyes that looked like frozen lakes. It really is a tragedy, Melanie babbled, pacing around the kitchen island, taking a large gulp of her wine. You cannot fight this kind of public backlash, Jamal. The internet never forgets. The corporate buyout offer from Apex Veterinary is still on the table. You need to call them right now. You need to sell the practice before the value hits zero. We can take the cash rebrand and start over somewhere else. It is the only logical choice to save our finances. Jamal slowly reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. He placed it gently on the marble countertop, sliding it precisely 1 inch in her direction. "I am not selling my clinic, Melanie," Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling with a calm, dangerous authority. "And there is no public backlash. There is only you, a burner phone, and a desperate, pathetic attempt to liquidate my life's work." Melanie froze. Her manic pacing stopped instantly. She lowered her wine glass, her eyes darting nervously toward the thick envelope. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, attempting to maintain her facade of innocent confusion. "I am trying to help you save our family finances." Jamal tapped the envelope with his index finger. "Natalie ran the digital forensics on every single review posted last night," he stated, stripping away the last remaining shreds of her cover story. She traced the IP addresses directly back to the hidden prepaid cellular device currently sitting at the bottom of your Prada handbag. "You spent 5 hours last night systematically fabricating stories about me killing family pets, just so you could force a corporate buyout and steal half the equity to fund your pathetic affair with Spencer." The color drained completely from Melanie's face. The mention of Spencer's name hit her like a physical blow. She realized in a fraction of a second that her entire clandestine life, her carefully orchestrated lies, and her destructive financial sabotage had been entirely exposed. The innocent, supportive wife routine shattered, leaving only the ugly, entitled reality underneath. She slammed her wine glass down onto the marble counter, the liquid sloshing violently over the rim. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. The sheer panic of being caught instantly morphed into defensive, explosive rage. "You want to know the truth?" Melanie screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the kitchen, completely abandoning her gentle persona. "Fine. You are completely delusional if you think I actually wanted to spend the rest of my life smelling like wet dog and listening to you complain about operating on stray cats. I only married you because you were safe. You're a boring vet. Spencer is making millions, and I deserve that lifestyle." Jamal remained perfectly still, letting her toxic confession hang in the air, allowing the hidden microphone to capture every single word of her vile admission. "You have no ambition," Melanie continued, pacing aggressively, her hands gesturing wildly. "You are perfectly content working in that sterile little clinic, making a modest, pathetic living. Spencer is a real man. He operates in the big leagues. He is making millions of dollars in corporate acquisitions, and he knows how to treat a woman who belongs in high society. I deserve that luxury lifestyle, Jamal. I deserve to wear designer clothes and attend elite country club galas. I do not deserve to be chained to a glorified dog groomer who lacks the basic corporate instinct to maximize his own profits." She pointed a manicured finger directly at his chest, her chest heaving with arrogant fury. "I posted those reviews because you are too cowardly to leverage your own assets. I needed the cash to secure my future, a future that does not involve clipping coupons or listening to your boring stories. You should be thanking me for trying to force you into a lucrative corporate buyout." I watched the live video feed from my highly secure office, feeling a deep, satisfying thrill. She had just verbally confessed to intentional defamation, financial sabotage, and marital fraud on a crystal-clear high-definition recording. Jamal had let her dig her own grave, and she had happily jumped inside with a shovel. Jamal doesn't yell. He simply hands her an envelope. It's an emergency ex parte order for sole custody of their kids, a freezing order on all their joint accounts, and a massive defamation lawsuit filed against her for the fake reviews. The evidence I compiled and transmitted to his legal team was irrefutable. It proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that she was actively attempting to defraud her husband, endanger his livelihood, and damage the standing of his clinic. Every single fake review, along with the precise timestamps and the corresponding IP logs, had been formally entered into the official court record. The judge had seen her malicious coordinated digital attack for exactly what it was. Her plan to destroy a good man and steal his cash to fund her fantasy life with Spencer was officially dead. The law had spoken, and it was entirely on Jamal's side. He offers her no pity, no apologies, no sympathy, and no second chances to explain her horrible betrayal. "Pack your bags, Melanie. You're cut off," Jamal says calmly. The heavy silence that followed Jamal's devastating ultimatum was absolute. He did not wait for Melanie to launch into another hysterical tirade or attempt to negotiate her way out of the corner she had enthusiastically painted herself into. He simply turned his back on her, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the emergency ex parte order resting on the pristine marble countertop. Melanie was entirely neutralized, surgically removed from his life and his veterinary practice with the very same clinical precision she had tried to use against him. Jamal sent me a secure single-word text message confirming the operation was complete. I smiled at my encrypted monitor. The second flank of our coordinated retaliation had held perfectly. Now the main event was rapidly approaching. The weekend of Spencer's highly anticipated startup launch gala finally arrived, casting a palpable buzzing energy over the city's affluent suburban neighborhoods. The venue was the prestigious Oak Creek Country Club, an exclusive members-only enclave where generational wealth and corporate arrogance violently collided. Barbara was treating the entire week leading up to the gala like a royal coronation. I had actively monitored her social media feeds and the digital credit card transactions she was still foolishly routing through Spencer's compromised devices. She was strutting around town treating the local service workers like absolute peasants. She ordered expensive floral arrangements, demanding the florists completely redesign the centerpieces 4 separate times without additional compensation. She terrorized the boutique dressmakers, barking orders at the seamstresses while sipping complimentary champagne. She was riding the intoxicating high of her son's newly stolen capital, completely convinced they had permanently secured their place among the city's untouchable elite. On Friday morning, I walked down my driveway to collect the mail from my secure lockbox. Amidst the standard utility bills and thick corporate prospectuses, a heavy cream-colored envelope caught my eye. It was made of expensive textured cardstock, sealed with a glob of dark red wax, stamped with the Oak Creek Country Club crest. The address was written in Barbara's distinct, aggressively looping calligraphy. I carried the heavy envelope back inside, placing it carefully on my kitchen island. I broke the wax seal with a silver letter opener, sliding out a thick, beautifully embossed invitation. It was the official gala announcement detailing the black tie dress code, the scheduled champagne reception, and the highly anticipated keynote speech by Spencer regarding his revolutionary new logistics startup. But Barbara had not sent me a genuine invitation. Tucked neatly behind the embossed card was a secondary piece of paper, a cheap neon pink sticky note slapped carelessly onto a printed map of the country club's service entrances. Barbara had written a mock employment offer in her sharp, messy handwriting. She formally invited me to report to the catering manager at 4 o'clock sharp to claim a spare apron. She included a vicious underlined postscript demanding I enter through the rear kitchen doors because the front lobby was strictly reserved for verified members and wealthy investors. She wanted me to physically serve hors d'oeuvres to the very people Spencer was actively trying to defraud. She wanted to look down from her VIP table and watch me carry empty champagne flutes back to the kitchen. I traced my finger over the neon pink sticky note, feeling a cold, familiar chill wash over me as an old memory violently surfaced. This was not the first time Barbara had attempted to force me into the role of domestic servant. 5 years ago, during our very first Thanksgiving as a married couple, she had orchestrated a nearly identical humiliation. Spencer had invited 24 of his most lucrative regional sales clients to his mother's sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate for the holiday dinner. I had spent 3 entire days helping Barbara prepare the massive, elaborate meal, meticulously following her incredibly demanding instructions. But when the guests finally arrived and took their assigned seats around the massive dining room table, I found that my name card was conspicuously missing. Barbara had pulled me aside into the crowded, chaotic kitchen, pressing a stained, oversized white apron firmly into my chest. She smiled with that same venomous, aristocratic superiority she was displaying now. She told me I needed to stay in the kitchen and manage the hot appetizers because I simply lacked the proper pedigree to sit at the main table and converse with Spencer's wealthy colleagues. She claimed my working-class background and my highly technical career would only bore the important guests. She wanted me pouring wine and clearing dirty plates deliberately, ensuring I was viewed as the hired help, rather than the woman legally married to her precious son. I had looked desperately through the swinging kitchen doors, making direct eye contact with Spencer as he laughed loudly with his clients. He saw me wearing the stained apron. He saw me holding a heavy tray of empty wine glasses. He completely ignored me, turning his back to ensure his own social standing remained perfectly intact. I stood in my quiet kitchen staring at the neon pink sticky note, the echoes of that Thanksgiving humiliation completely failing to trigger the anger Barbara had so desperately hoped for. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to feel utterly defeated, cast out from their glittering world, and relegated to the shadows. She had absolutely no idea that I preferred operating in the shadows, because that was exactly where the deadliest traps were always set. I did not throw the mocking invitation away. I placed it gently next to my encrypted laptop. I had no intention of ignoring her cruel little summons. I fully intended to attend the Oak Creek Country Club gala, but I was certainly not going to be using the service entrance. I picked up my smartphone and dialed a highly restricted direct phone number. I bypassed the country club's standard reception desk entirely. The line rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. It was Marcus, the senior event director for the Oak Creek Country Club. 2 years ago, Marcus had found himself trapped in a devastating, highly complex tax audit that threatened to completely dismantle his entire event management company. I had stepped in as a private consultant, forensically rebuilding his financial ledgers from scratch, identifying the critical filing errors, and aggressively negotiating a highly favorable settlement with the federal auditors. I had single-handedly saved his business from total ruin. He had sworn absolute, unwavering loyalty to me, promising to repay the massive favor whenever I required it. Natalie, Marcus said, his voice instantly warming with genuine gratitude. It is an absolute pleasure to hear from you. How can I possibly assist you today? I need to make an adjustment to tonight's event, I said, keeping my calm tone perfectly level as I slowly paced across the hard kitchen floor. The startup launch gala being heavily funded by Spencer and Barbara inside your main ballroom later this very busy weekend. Marcus sighed, the sound carrying a distinct note of professional exhaustion. Yes, the upcoming startup launch gala. They have been an absolute nightmare to deal with all week. Barbara has insulted 3 of my best servers, and Spencer demanded we import a specific brand of vintage champagne. But their cashier's check cleared the bank, so we are accommodating their aggressive demands. Exactly what kind of immediate adjustment do you need, Natalie? I sat down at my kitchen island, opening my laptop and accessing my secure offshore holding accounts. I am looking at the event's promotional materials right now, Marcus. I see that Spencer has purchased the standard premium hosting package. I want to know exactly what it would cost to completely override his contract and secure the absolute top-tier platinum title sponsorship for the entire evening. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the phone. Marcus was a seasoned professional, but even he was momentarily thrown off balance by the sheer audacity of my request. The platinum title sponsorship is incredibly expensive, Natalie. It gives the sponsor complete, absolute creative and administrative control over the entire event. It dictates the branding, the seating arrangements, and the microphone access during the keynote speeches. Spencer paid $100,000 for the premium package. The platinum tier requires an immediate, non-refundable wire transfer of $250,000. I did not hesitate for a single microsecond. I already had the offshore funds perfectly positioned and fully ready to immediately deploy. Send me the secure routing number right now, Marcus. I am initiating the wire transfer today. I want the platinum title sponsorship locked securely in my name, and I want it done silently. I will be attending the Oak Creek Gala tonight, but I will definitely not be attending as the hired waitstaff. I will be attending the gala as the platinum title sponsor. The evening air was exceptionally crisp and thick, with the heavy scent of expensive designer perfume, imported cigars, and desperate corporate ambition, as my chauffeured black town car slowly pulled up to the grand sweeping entrance of the elite Oak Creek Country Club. The valet rushed forward to open my door, and I stepped out onto the pristine cobblestone driveway. The venue was a fortress of exclusionary wealth, surrounded by manicured lawns and towering oak trees. As I walked toward the front doors, my eyes briefly drifted toward the discreet service entrance on the left side of the building. Seeing it triggered a vivid freezing memory from exactly 5 years ago. It was our very first Thanksgiving as a married couple. Spencer had invited 24 of his most lucrative regional sales clients to Barbara's sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate. I had spent 3 entire days cooking the elaborate meal, but when the guests arrived, Barbara handed me a stained white apron. She told me I lacked the proper pedigree to sit at the main table. She forced me to serve drinks to Spencer's friends, ensuring I was viewed as the hired help. Spencer had watched me carry heavy trays of empty wine glasses and completely ignored me to protect his own social standing. I pushed the bitter memory away entirely. I was no longer the obedient, tragically invisible wife desperately seeking their approval. I handed my platinum sponsor credential to the tuxedo-clad concierge at the front reception desk. His eyes widened significantly as he processed the highest tier of access. He immediately bowed his head in deference and swiftly waved me past the velvet ropes. I walked down the long, heavily carpeted hallway, leading to the main ballroom, feeling the heavy silk of my custom-tailored gown swish against my legs. It was a breathtaking emerald masterpiece, cut with sharp architectural precision that radiated quiet, absolute power. I stepped through the double mahogany doors and into the sprawling, magnificent ballroom. The massive space was packed to maximum capacity, with the city's highest financial elite, incredibly wealthy private investors, and Spencer's demanding corporate bosses. Waitstaff wove seamlessly through the densely packed crowd, carrying silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne. I paused intentionally at the very top of the grand sweeping staircase that descended into the room. As I moved down the first few steps, a strange cascading silence began to ripple rapidly through the venue. Heads turned. Elite conversations halted mid-sentence. The sharp clinking of crystal glasses slowly faded into a tense, buzzing hush. The entire room went completely silent. I was an undeniable, commanding presence. From directly across the highly polished ballroom floor, I easily spotted Barbara. She was heavily draped in sparkling diamonds and wearing a garish silver gown, aggressively holding court near the main stage like a queen. When her eyes finally locked onto mine, the smug, aristocratic satisfaction melted off her face in an instant, immediately replaced by a deep, ugly shade of purple rage. She dropped her delicate champagne flute directly onto a passing waiter's silver tray and marched furiously across the room, violently shoving her way past 2 incredibly wealthy venture capitalists. "Security!" Barbara suddenly shrieked, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her carefully cultivated, refined, high society facade. She frantically waved her manicured arms toward 2 large men in dark suits standing near the grand entrance. "Throw this trash out. She is a trespasser. She is trying to ruin my son's corporate launch. Get her out of my sight right now." She stopped just inches from my face, her chest heaving with pure, unadulterated hysteria. She looked me up and down frantically, taking in the expensive custom gown and my absolute lack of a waitress apron. "You have absolutely no right to be standing in this room," Barbara hissed, her voice violently vibrating with pure, unadulterated venom. "You are not on the guest list." I smiled warmly, keeping my posture rigid and my voice perfectly calm. "Actually, Barbara, I happen to be on the very top of the guest list tonight." The 2 massive security guards took several extremely hesitant steps forward, clearly unsure of how to physically handle a calm woman wearing a custom dress that cost far more than their combined annual salary. Before they could reach us to escalate the situation, the wealthy crowd parted seamlessly, and a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a razor-sharp bespoke suit stepped firmly forward. It was Mr. Caldwell, the ruthless, highly respected CEO of the multinational logistics firm that Spencer supposedly worked for. He was the man holding the financial strings to Spencer's entire career and the primary investor for tonight's heavily promoted startup launch. Barbara instantly panicked. She quickly plastered a desperate, intensely syrupy smile across her face, frantically attempting to smoothly play off her unhinged screaming outburst. "Oh, Mr. Caldwell, I am so incredibly sorry for this minor disturbance," she gushed, grabbing his tailored sleeve with frantic, inappropriate familiarity. "This is just my son's deranged former wife. She has been struggling mentally since the separation. We will have her removed immediately so the gala can proceed as planned." Mr. Caldwell completely and utterly ignored Barbara. He did not even bother to look at her. He firmly removed her clawing hand from his sleeve and stepped directly past her, stopping squarely in front of me. He extended his right hand, grasping mine in a firm, deeply respectful professional handshake. "Natalie," Mr. Caldwell proudly said, his deep, resonant voice booming clearly across the suddenly silent, fully captivated ballroom. "Thank you for the incredible forensic audit you provided the board this morning." Spencer, who had just rushed over from the crowded open bar to physically intervene, stopped completely dead in his tracks. The color violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, hollow ghost. He stared directly at his CEO, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. Barbara looked frantically between us, her shallow brain completely failing to process the catastrophic reality unfolding right before her wide eyes. "Forensic audit," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "What audit? What is happening here?" I kept my eyes locked securely on Spencer, watching the exact moment his entire fraudulent empire crumbled to absolute dust. I had spent the last week meticulously compiling every single altered invoice, every offshore wire transfer, and every piece of definitive digital proof that Spencer had been systematically embezzling corporate funds directly from Caldwell's logistics firm to fund his lavish lifestyle and this very gala. The massive amount of cash in our joint account was only a fraction of his total theft. I had bypassed Spencer entirely and delivered the comprehensive, undeniable dossier directly to Mr. Caldwell's private security team at 6 exactly this morning. I had legally, undeniably documented Spencer stealing millions from the very men he was currently trying to impress. "Your son is an exceptional thief, Barbara," Mr. Caldwell said, his tone dropping to a chilling absolute zero that echoed through the room. "But he is a terrible accountant. Natalie's financial forensics just saved my firm from pouring another $10 million into this completely fabricated fraudulent startup. We have already contacted the federal authorities. They are waiting patiently outside the country club gates right now." Spencer took a desperate, panicked step backward, violently bumping into a glass cocktail table. He looked wildly around the expansive room, desperately searching for an exit, but the heavy mahogany doors were now firmly blocked by Caldwell's personal, highly trained security team. He was completely, utterly trapped, suffocating in front of the very elite audience he had paid exorbitant amounts of stolen money to applaud him. The illusion of generational wealth had officially shattered. Before Spencer could even attempt to formulate a pathetic lie or Barbara could launch into another hysterical screaming denial, a piercing sound echoed loudly through the massive ballroom. It was the loud, distinct metallic squeal of a microphone being deliberately activated. Every single head in the room snapped instantly toward the main stage. Jamal was standing casually at the primary podium, bathed completely in the bright, focused stage lights. He wore a tailored black tuxedo, looking incredibly calm and terrifyingly collected. He held a crystal glass of expensive champagne lightly in his right hand. Melanie was nowhere to be seen in the crowd. He had legally, surgically removed her from his life earlier that afternoon, and now he was here to finish the demolition. He looked down from the stage at Spencer, his eyes burning with cold, absolute retribution. The entire ballroom held its collective breath in total, unyielding silence. We had synchronized this precise moment down to the exact second. The financial trap had triggered flawlessly, completely destroying Spencer's career, and now the personal destruction would finally commence. Jamal slowly leaned forward into the very bright stage light and confidently tapped the metal microphone twice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to propose a toast to family." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Jamal stood under the brilliant stage lights, projecting a terrifying calm. He lowered his champagne flute onto the polished podium. He ignored the elite crowd. His eyes were locked onto Spencer, who remained frozen beside Mr. Caldwell. Jamal reached into his tuxedo pocket and withdrew a remote control, aiming it at the audiovisual booth. The colossal projector screen behind him ignited. The screen was flooded with a bank statement. For the past 7 years, Jamal's voice resonated. "I dedicated my life to building an independent veterinary practice. It was an honest endeavor. I spent my days performing surgeries and saving animals. I believed my wife Melanie stood beside me as a partner in that life." He clicked the remote again. The screen shifted, displaying a ledger filled with highlighted withdrawals. But honesty was never enough for Melanie. Jamal continued. She looked at the elite members and felt a toxic entitlement. She wanted the designer dresses, luxury vehicles, and social superiority. When she realized a veterinarian's salary could not fund her delusions, she decided to forcefully extract the capital herself. The screen flashed, displaying a series of forged checks, unauthorized wire transfers, and diverted clinic funds. The wealthy investors leaned forward, their champagne forgotten, captivated by the live execution on stage. "My wife embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from my clinic's accounts," Jamal stated. "Last night, she orchestrated a digital attack against my business. She posted dozens of fabricated reviews, falsely accusing me of animal neglect. Her goal was to manufacture a crisis, force me into a panicked buyout, and steal half in our impending divorce." Jamal clicked the remote once more. The screen displayed the digital forensics I had provided, mapping the IP addresses of the fake reviews directly to Melanie's hidden burner phone. The evidence was completely irrefutable and displayed for the city's elite to witness. But Melanie was not operating alone, Jamal said. He turned his gaze back to Spencer, who was sweating, shaking under the intense scrutiny of Mr. Caldwell. She found a willing accomplice in a man who shared her appetite for unearned luxury and fraud. She found Spencer. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The society wives covered their mouths in shock. Barbara let out a strangled noise, clutching her throat as if she were suffocating. Spencer believed he was the architect of this deception, Jamal projected. He believed he was stealing my wife just as easily as he was stealing millions from Mr. Caldwell's firm. He promised Melanie a life of luxury funded by stolen capital. They planned to take my clinic's money, combine it with Spencer's fortune, and ride off into the sunset as the new king and queen of high society. At that exact moment, the ballroom's service doors pushed open. Melanie slipped into the room, trying to remain unnoticed. She had been evicted from Jamal's home, cut off from her credit cards, and locked out of joint accounts. She had nowhere else to go. Frantically hoping to find Spencer to demand rescue, she was wearing a designer coat, unaware she was walking directly into a live execution. Jamal spotted her immediately. He stopped pacing and pointed directly at her. The follow spot operator instantly swung a bright beam of light directly onto Melanie, pinning her against the velvet wallpaper. "Welcome to the gala, Melanie," Jamal said, his voice echoing loudly. "You are just in time for the grand finale." Melanie froze like a terrified deer caught in headlights. She looked wildly around the room, realizing that hundreds of the city's most powerful individuals were staring at her with unvarnished disgust. She tried to lift her expensive leather handbag to shield her face from the devastating public exposure, but there was nowhere to run. The society wives she had spent years desperately trying to impress were now looking at her like a repulsive, toxic disease, whispering viciously behind manicured hands. Spencer looked at Melanie with a flicker of arrogant possession. He still foolishly believed that even though his financial crimes were exposed, he had at least successfully conquered another man's wife. He still believed he possessed a twisted kind of romantic victory. Jamal saw Spencer's lingering arrogance and offered a slow, cold smile. The final fatal blow was primed and ready. "You thought you had won," Spencer Jamal said. "You thought you had outsmarted your boss, my wife, and me. You believed Melanie was blindly devoted to your manufactured wealth. But thieves and liars never truly trust each other. Melanie was not just manipulating me to fund her lifestyle. She was manipulating you too." Jamal pressed the remote control for the absolute final time. The massive screen behind him went black for a fraction of a second before exploding into a vibrant, undeniable collage of high-definition photographs and explicitly detailed text message transcripts. The entire ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked cries, loud gasps, and frantic, scandalized whispering. The screen displayed clear, undeniable visual evidence of Melanie engaged in a passionate, clandestine romantic affair. But the man in the photographs was not Spencer. It was a young, handsome man with messy hair and a sharp suit. "Allow me to introduce the actual love of Melanie's life," Jamal announced, his voice slicing cleanly through the rising chaos of the crowd. "This is Spencer's 22-year-old executive assistant." The humiliation was absolute and completely catastrophic. Spencer stared up at the projector screen, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging slack. His entire world was collapsing simultaneously. He had not only been exposed as a massive federal fraud by his former wife, but he had also been brutally cuckolded by his own junior intern. The sheer embarrassment of the double betrayal hit him with the force of a physical concussive blast. He was a complete laughingstock, publicly neutered in front of his billionaire CEO and the entire elite. Melanie whimpered loudly, dropping her handbag onto the polished floor. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself against the wall. She looked around the massive ballroom, meeting the eyes of the wealthy elites. There was no sympathy, no understanding, and absolutely no forgiveness. They saw her exactly for what she was, a parasitic fraud who had attempted to destroy two different men for her own selfish gain. Jamal looked directly at Melanie, his expression devoid of any remaining warmth or affection. He was a man who had completely excised a cancer from his life. "You wanted high society," Melanie Jamal said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Now they all know exactly what you are worth. Nothing." The words struck her like a physical execution. Melanie let out a pathetic sob and turned, fleeing blindly through the service doors, running out into the cold, dark night, with absolutely nothing to her name but the clothes on her back. On the ballroom floor, Spencer's mind finally violently snapped. The combined weight of his exposed embezzlement, his mother's public humiliation, and the brutal revelation of Melanie's affair with his own assistant completely destroyed his fragile psyche. He had lost his lucrative job, his stolen money, his impending freedom, and his fragile masculine pride, all in the span of 5 devastating minutes. A primal, unhinged roar ripped from Spencer's throat. His face flushed a dangerous, violent shade of crimson. He completely abandoned any remaining instinct for self-preservation. Driven purely by blind, humiliated rage, he lowered his head, shoved his way violently past Mr. Caldwell, and charged frantically toward the main stage. He scrambled up the wooden steps like a rabid animal, his fists clenched, intending to physically attack Jamal and silence the man who had just destroyed his ego. Jamal did not flinch. He did not retreat, and he did not show a single ounce of fear. He stood perfectly still, watching Spencer blindly charge toward him. At the absolute last possible millisecond, Jamal smoothly, gracefully stepped aside. He moved with the calm, calculated precision of a seasoned matador, sidestepping a charging bull. Spencer, entirely blinded by his own uncontrollable rage and completely unable to halt his aggressive momentum, sailed helplessly past Jamal. He crashed violently headfirst into the heavy, solid oak podium. The impact produced a loud, sickening crack that echoed sharply through the silent ballroom. The microphone stand shattered, and Spencer collapsed into a pathetic, groaning heap on the hardwood stage floor, clutching his bleeding face in absolute humiliating defeat. The crowd did not move to help him. Mr. Caldwell simply shook his head in cold, absolute disgust. Barbara let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, attempting to run toward the stage, but Caldwell's security team instantly blocked her path, refusing to let her interfere with the beautiful, orchestrated demolition. Suddenly, the heavy brass-handled main ballroom doors burst open with explosive, authoritative force. The violent sound drew every single eye away from the pathetic scene on the stage. 4 men in dark suits with badges around their necks march in. They moved with synchronized, terrifying purpose. The heavy brass doors slammed shut behind them, sealing the ballroom. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a closely cropped haircut, held up a leather wallet, displaying a gleaming federal badge. He announced his presence with a voice that cut through the lingering gasps of the elite crowd. They were special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked by investigators from the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The collective atmosphere of the room shifted from scandalized shock to absolute paralyzing dread. Mr. Caldwell's personal security team immediately stepped aside, clearing a wide path for the federal authorities. The agents did not even glance in my direction. They marched straight past my table, their heavy footsteps echoing against the polished hardwood floor, and completely surrounded the stage, where Spencer was still groaning and clutching his bleeding face. 2 agents hauled him roughly to his feet. The other 2 agents formed a tight, inescapable circle around Barbara. Barbara pressed her back against the nearest velvet wall, her eyes darting frantically between the federal badges and her bleeding son. She looked at Mr. Caldwell, pleading silently for an intervention that would never come. Finally, her terrified gaze found me. I picked up a fresh flute of vintage champagne from a nearby table, took a slow, deliberate sip, and walked gracefully toward her. The crowd parted for me, recognizing the architect of this beautiful destruction. I stopped just outside the perimeter of the federal agents. Barbara was trembling violently, her expensive diamonds shaking against her collarbone. I looked at her with absolute freezing indifference. Remember that $850,000 you stole using the forged power of attorney? I asked, making sure my voice carried clearly to the surrounding investors. You thought you were stealing my life savings. You thought you had outsmarted the working-class girl who lacked the proper pedigree. Barbara stared at me, her mouth opening and closing in silent mounting horror. That was not my money, Barbara, I explained, watching the devastating realization slowly register in her eyes. That was corporate money Spencer embezzled from Mr. Caldwell's company over the course of 3 years. I deliberately funneled that stolen capital into a vulnerable honeypot account, practically begging Spencer to find it, and you took the bait perfectly. By wiring it across state lines using a fraudulent document, you both committed federal wire fraud and money laundering. I took another slow sip of champagne, relishing the absolute panic consuming her face. But that is not even the best part, I added, stepping slightly closer. Do you remember the mandatory divorce deposition? Do you remember how smug Spencer was when I happily signed that final settlement offer? You brought your expensive, aggressive attack dog attorney to legally cement the theft. And he did his job flawlessly, by forcing me to officially waive all rights to those specific funds, and by having Spencer legally claim them as his sole independent corporate bonus. You permanently bound yourselves to the stolen money. And since I signed that waiver in the deposition, the paper trail proves the money is 100% yours. Enjoy the tax evasion charges. The lead FBI agent grabbed Spencer's arms, twisting them sharply behind his back. The sharp metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoed loudly across the silent ballroom. Spencer did not fight back. The fight had been completely drained from him. He simply hung his head, blood dripping from his chin onto his ruined bespoke suit as the agent loudly and clearly read him his Miranda rights. The illusion of the untouchable corporate conqueror was dead, replaced by the pathetic reality of a common thief facing decades in federal prison. The blindingly bright camera flashes from several stunned attendees suddenly illuminated his absolute disgrace. He had spent his entire adult life meticulously constructing a completely fraudulent empire of unearned superiority, constantly looking down on those who actually worked for their success. He believed he was entirely immune to the consequences of his own actions, shielded by his mother's fake pedigree and his stolen bank accounts. Now, that deeply fragile house of cards had completely disintegrated, burying him permanently underneath the crushing, inescapable weight of his own monumental hubris, leaving him with nothing but the horrifying prospect of prison. Barbara watched her golden child being shackled and finally reached her breaking point. She threw her hands in the air, let out a theatrical, piercing wail, and fainted dramatically toward the polished floor, expecting the wealthy gentlemen around her to rush to her aid. No one moved a muscle. The surrounding crowd of millionaires merely stepped back, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive contamination of her exposed crimes. Her carefully woven social web had vanished in an instant. She hit the hardwood floor with a painfully heavy, completely undignified thud, ruining her expensive silver gown. The IRS agents simply looked down at her motionless body, with bored, bureaucratic indifference. They did not call for a medic. They did not offer her a glass of water. They just stepped over her to put the cuffs on her wrists. Her generational wealth, her elitist country club memberships, and her desperate need for high society superiority had all culminated in this exact, pathetic moment. Across the ballroom, far away from the flashing stage lights and the federal agents, Melanie was left sobbing alone by the buffet table. She was huddled desperately, her expensive silk coat pulled tightly around her shoulders. She was weeping uncontrollably, mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. The wealthy society wives she had so desperately sought to impress were actively avoiding her, casting looks of profound disgust in her direction. She was entirely isolated, completely broke, and completely exposed. She had no corporate buyout, no wealthy lover, and no luxurious future. All she had waiting for her was Jamal's impending, financially devastating defamation lawsuits and a freezing order that left her without a single dollar to her name. She had bet everything on Spencer's illusions, and now she was left holding absolutely nothing. I turned away from the pathetic display of my former in-laws being hauled out of the country club by federal agents. I looked back toward the main stage. Jamal was standing near the shattered oak podium, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with smooth, elegant precision. Our eyes met across the chaotic, buzzing ballroom. We did not need to speak. We did not need to gloat. Natalie and Jamal share a victorious nod across the chaotic ballroom. We had executed the perfect synchronized demolition. We had reclaimed our lives, protected our assets, and ensured that the parasites who tried to destroy us were completely eradicated. I turned my back on the Oak Creek Country Club gala and walked confidently toward the main exit. The wealthy investors parted for me, offering respectful, slightly terrified nods as I passed. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The oppressive stench of Barbara's perfume and Spencer's arrogance instantly vanished, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of absolute freedom. My black town car was waiting patiently at the bottom of the cobblestone driveway. The valet rushed forward, opening the heavy door with extreme deference. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, feeling the quiet, powerful hum of the engine beneath me. As the long black car smoothly pulled away from the manicured grounds of the country club, I reached over and rolled down the tinted window. I looked out at the glittering, expansive city skyline, watching the towering skyscrapers pierce the dark night sky. The beautiful, chaotic energy of the metropolis buzzed in the distance. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp night air, letting the incredible sensation of absolute victory wash entirely over me. The monumental weight that had been pressing down onto my shoulders for the past 7 agonizing years had finally lifted completely. The toxic, suffocating chapter of my life involving Spencer and Barbara was officially permanently closed. I had painstakingly transformed their malicious arrogance and unbridled greed into the exact instruments of their own spectacular destruction. The brilliant, colorful city lights reflected beautifully against the highly polished glass of my vehicle, illuminating the dark, quiet interior with quick, rhythmic flashes of bright, urban energy. Every flashing street lamp felt like a glowing testament to the absolute power of calculated, silent retribution. I leaned my head back against the soft, premium leather headrest, allowing my muscles to fully relax for the very first time in months. The complicated, meticulously layered strategy had required absolute patience, flawless execution, and a completely unwavering emotional detachment. There had been moments of intense doubt, moments when the sheer magnitude of their deception threatened to overwhelm my focus. But I had stayed the course. I had trusted the undeniable mathematical certainty of the digital ledgers. And now the absolute finality of their ruin was securely cemented into the unyielding records of the federal justice system. Jamal would rebuild his thriving veterinary clinic entirely free from Melanie's toxic, draining influence. He would raise his children in a peaceful, secure environment shielded forever from her manipulative, greedy ambition. And I would continue to expand my consulting firm, wielding my financial expertise like a finely sharpened blade, absolutely untouchable by the elitist snobs who once believed they could discard me. My mother-in-law once said I had no assets to protect myself. She was wrong. My weapon wasn't in a safe. It was knowing exactly where every dirty dime of theirs went. The best revenge isn't screaming, it's letting their own greed tie the noose.